party peoples, this is Cameo Punk, and welcome to an episode of NGGMTV, which is short for Nerds, Geeks, Gaming, Movies, Television, and Video Games. Today I'm gonna go a little solo and talk to you about Subnautica. And now with the game released back in January and the DLC that's currently in production, that's including the new Arctic biome, and I'm so excited to see that. I can't wait for it. I love Subnautica. I love the ocean. The ocean's so freaking cool. You might be thinking that I'm going to discuss the DLC with you guys, because you would think there's not a lot to discuss about the main game. We've pretty much seen everything that there is, and it's pretty much when you play the game, it's self-explanatory. So there's not much to really discuss, except maybe how the two giant skulls in the game could have existed during the same time period, and what their descendants look like. But I guess I just should start from the beginning of this entire thing. And if you've never played Subnautica before, this is going to be a little bit of a spoiler. If you have played it or you have seen someone play it, then you absolutely know 100% what I'm getting ready to talk about. But in the game of Subnautica, you, of course, your ship crashes, you're the only survivor out of the entire crew. You have to find a cure for a disease, and yada yada yada. But the way to get to this cure, you have to go through an area called the Lost River, or the Lost River Cavern, Lost River Forest. The best way I can tell you to describe it is it's the place with the most skeletons out of the entire game besides the lava zone. And in the lava zone we find the Reaper skeletons, which we know the story about those. But in the Lost River, we find 4 skeletons, the Sea Dragon Leviathan, the Research Beta, or the Research Specimen, I should say, the Gargantuan Skeleton, and then the Ancient Skull that we know that the precursors were currently studying. And these souls have some similar features with certain creatures. And I kind of want to start off with talking about their descendants, because on the Subnautica wiki, there are no descendants actually listed. The Research Specimen does have listed relatives, and there's even a question mark icon for relatives of the creatures like Peepers, the Oculus, the Red Eyes, and then the Ray creatures altogether. There is a question mark of saying what kind of creature would exist to be an ancestor of this particular group. And I would like to see, maybe we would get an answer in the DLC. But the Gargantuan Skull and the Ancient Skull, they actually don't have any descendants listed on the Wikipedia page. And the only clue that we kind of get to what they could possibly have is the Gargantuan giving us a guess of using the physical features relating it to the Sea Dragon, and then in an extension, the Sea Emperor, because if we compare the body shapes of the Sea Dragon and the Sea Emperor Leviathans, we can see similar forms in terms of the fact that their lower torsos, their legs, they don't have any legs, they've got tentacles, they both have extended arms. That's how we can kind of relate them a little bit. And if we just take the physical appearances just based on things like as simple as the skull, we can easily apply that to the Ancient Skull. Now, looking at the skull, the Ancient Skull to be specific, we can see a flattened face, a little bit of an extended chin, just a little, and its skull is really elongated, pretty much. I mean, those 4 holes that you see back behind the ears and behind the mouth is actually its ear holes, or what would be something like an ear hole. And already, just right off of a facial appearance, just looking at it face forward or even from a side, one creature that we already know exists in the game has at least 2 of these features, and that's the Reaper Leviathan. And if we could kind of take that Reaper Leviathan and use it kind of like a middle ground, I guess you could say, to push further on the features, we can even go as far as saying that the Ghost Leviathan is also a descendant of the Ancient Skull. It does have the flattened face like the Reaper does, and so does the Ancient Skull. Its large is wide. It's very extensive, but in a more horizontal rather than vertical pattern, most kind of like a hammerhead shark is the best way to describe it. And it even, if you haven't seen, you can't see it face forward. You'd have to see it at a side or at an angle, but it does have a barb-like chin that kind of sticks out from the creature. Which kind of brings another question, because when I was looking at all three of these creatures, I could not find a nasal passage or some form of a nasal opening. So how would these creatures hunt in some form or way if there's no way to kind of sense or smell anything like, for example, like blood in the water? And I think I kind of got that figured out. With the Reaper first, we know that it uses echolocation based on the databank entry. And echolocation essentially can be described based on the shape of its skull. If we can compare it to something like an orca or a dolphin, we can suggest that the long point on the front of its skull is what's used to send out signals, and its chin, its little extended chin, is what receives those signals and sends it to the brain saying there's a possible food source, there's something different over here, there's a disturbance, might be worth some investigation. That's essentially how that creature knows that we're coming in its direction, that it senses us before we're even there. It even essentially says that if you can hear the sound of the creature, you're already too close based on the databank entry. Now, for the Ghost Leviathan, we find out that its body are suited for low light and deep environments. Basically a twilight zone, the midnight zone in our own oceans, if you want to kind of get an idea where that is, put that. But they have to be pretty sturdy to be able to withstand such heavy pressures. And we also know that the creatures in areas like the ones that we find the Ghost Leviathans in dark areas where light is not really visible to the area, we know that the creature uses bioluminescence. And we even have those kind of creatures in our own oceans in areas like the Midnight and the Twilight Zone, even deeper than that, that uses bioluminescence to do one of several things. One, they're either attracting a mate or trying to attract their prey, kind of like you would see with an anglerfish. And an anglerfish, if you're wondering, is that fish from Finding Nemo that Dory and Marlin get way too close to. That's what an anglerfish is. It's possible that they can use their bioluminescence for defense, to kind of trick the predator to think that they're somewhere else when they're actually in a different direction. And sometimes even predators use it to attract their own prey or to hide itself from its prey. And when I mentioned its little chin, it has a little barb and it glows, kind of like what you would see with an anglerfish, except on the bottom of its jaw. And the idea of that is possible to attract the fish close enough because it eats very small prey. It has jaws big enough to crush your ship, crush you, and even at a young age, it's even shown that it can eat larger prey, including you as a juvenile. But when it gets bigger, it's kind of turned into a filter feeder, and it's kind of attracting prey with that glowing barb on its chin to get it closer towards its gaping jaws so that way it can consume its prey. So with bioluminescence for one and echolocation for the other, how could this ancient skull, the creature of the skull, hunt? I honestly have absolutely no clue to what it could possibly be. It could be possible that it used bioluminescence. We wouldn't know unless we see a full fleshed out version of even just the head would be able to confirm whether or not it had bioluminescence in it as a use for hunting, attracting prey, or mating, or anything like that. Or it could have possibly be in the same path as the Reaper, using echolocation, considering that it has a large skull and an extended chin. Not a massive extended chin, but a little bit. So the idea of what this creature, how this creature could hunt, is kind of puzzling. And again, we wouldn't know until the DLC comes out and we find some form of a fleshed out version of this creature to kind of get an idea of how it ate, how it hunt, and essentially what it looked like to begin with when it was alive, when it existed. And I would really like to see that. And this also brings another question about both skulls, not just the gargantuan fossil, not just the skull, the ancient skull. It kind of brings these two together. Is it possible that, best way to do it, is it possible that the ancient skull was possibly a food source, or they fought each other, or they used each other for food sources? Because right now, as far as we know, those are the two biggest predators that have ever existed on the planet. Those are the only two we know of. We don't know fully 100% what they look like just based on their skulls. We can get an idea through concept art and things like that, but we wouldn't know exactly until we actually 100% see it for ourselves if they brought it into the game in some form or way. But since we've been using physical features and kind of behavioral patterns from the descendants of these creatures, the answer could be a yes if we think about it. And you get that idea from the fact that, again, when you go to the active lava zone where we find a bunch of Reaper skeletons and we scan them, we find out that sea dragons go to the surface, they hunt Reapers, they bring them down to the lava zones, and then they can use them for consumption. And it's an unfortunate way to die. I mean, you don't want to be dragged to something that's practically so deep that your body might not be able to handle it. That's probably, if any form or way, how these Reapers are even dying, if it's not something as simple as saying a bite across the throat to cut off any form of air supply. That's also another possibility, that the sea dragons could be hunting them. And so it gives the idea of, could the ancient skulls and the gargantuan skulls, could they have existed within the time period, with the idea that gargantuan skull, the gargantuan fossil, the creatures from that skeleton hunted the ancient skulls, the creatures from the ancient skull. Now there is a hole, I will admit there is a hole, and that hole happens to be a 2 million year age gap between the two fossils. And that's understandable. You know, creatures adapt. They're supposed to adapt in order to either thrive and exist, or if they don't, they eventually wind up going extinct for their inability to continue adapting to whatever is to their surroundings. And the thing is, you can't exactly 100% say that the ancient skull came from the gargantuan fossil. It is possible, but in 2011, and this is a little old for a source, I'm not gonna lie to you, it is quite a bit old, but Oregon State University, they did a study tracking evolutionary adaptations in significant changes in body sizes in humans and us in body size, and in the conclusion, to make sure that a major change to accumulate and persist, it takes about 1 million years with that major change. If it continues and continues on, it will take about 1 million years for a trait to absolutely disappear from a creature. So the best guess to go with that is to say that the creatures may not be one after the other. For example, gargantuan fossil became the ancient skull, and the ancient skull evolved and split up and went to the 4 different leviathans we have in the game, or at least the 4 largest leviathans that could possibly kill us. We know that the Sea Emperor is actually also a filter feeder and is actually the smartest and the most intellectual out of the 4 major leviathans. But to have to go from one skull to another within about a 2 million year period might not seem to be the best solution to these creatures. It's more likely to be possible that the gargantuan fossil and the ancient fossil may be derived from the same ancestors before them on the planet, and then from there broke off and creating into 2 separate chains, 2 separate creatures, possibly even hunting each other, if we go with that kind of idea into guessing that these creatures exist within the same time period. And if we even continue further on, saying that the ancient skull gives us today our Reaper and Ghost Leviathans and the Gargantuan fossil, which we only see a third of that creature from its fossil remains that we see in the game. But it's good to go based on physical appearances and behavioral patterns of their current descendants to say that the ancient skull, it's related to the Reaper and the Ghost Leviathan based on facial recognition, and possibly even get an idea of guessing the behavioral patterns of the ant creature responsible for the ancient skull. And we could even say that, well, even with the databank, even though it says it's speculation for the entry in the databank for the creature with such similar physical appearances and skull shape to a sea dragon leviathan, and by extension a sea emperor leviathan, it's not that hard likely. I mean, the fact that the two of the largest leviathans in the entire class that's alive, not including the extinct ones, have very similar physical features except for anything in the head. That's pretty interesting and ironic to do in terms of creature relations. So it does show that, and even in terms of just between the sea dragon and the sea emperor leviathans, one broke off to feed on the much smaller prey, becoming a filter feeder, which is our sea emperor, and even became even smart enough to have the ability of telepathy, which was pretty interesting for a creature to be able to do, to communicate mentally with another person. And then it's good to go as far as telling that the ancient skull now gives us the Reaper and the Ghost Leviathans. And if you're still thinking that there's no way the Reaper and the Ghost Leviathan are related, consider the fact that, again, I said earlier, creatures have to adapt. They have to thrive. They have to be able to get to their prey in some form or way in order to survive. And the descendant that might connect them to the two of these together did that. They broke off into separate groups. One became more adapted to hunting in low light environments, heavy pressure water, and the other one became more suited to much closer to the ocean's surface and adapting in that form or way. So it's really interesting. I can't wait to see what they do in the DLC to bring even this kind of an idea together if possible, or even to give us a better look at what the ancient skull and the gargantuan fossil even looked like. It would be really great to see a possibility of maybe even just a frozen head in the ice in the Arctic biome, because we know that creatures can freeze within entombed in ice and everything else in between, but they won't come back to life. That's a lovely fact that we should be thankful for knowing. But I would really like to see the ancient skull and the gargantuan fossil, even if it's just the heads. The heads alone will tell you a lot about a creature. Even if we just get the heads from the DLC and they're fleshed out, we can make so much more comparisons, analysis of what these creatures were like, how they hunted, what they looked like, what kind of skills, what was their adaptations. Were they more suited to deeper waters, or were they a little bit closer towards shallow waters when the water levels were probably, when the ocean floor wasn't as high as it is in the game now? But other than that, that is it for this episode of NGGMTV. If you liked this episode, hit that thumbs up button and hit that subscribe button. I'd really appreciate it. And until the next video, whatever the heck it is I decide to upload, I'll see you guys then. So, bye guys!